All right, everyone's being recorded. Just wait for everyone's uploads to start. All right. Welcome back into One Winning Pod, where we will be looking ahead to the Ravens' Sunday night football game in Jacksonville. Man, this was a great game last year. From an excitement standpoint, obviously, the Ravens did not pull off the win there. But look, the Ravens are going to get another crack at them. Both teams really high in the divisional playoff race for the AFC. It's going to be a great matchup. And here to talk us with this game for us, we're welcoming to the podcast Justin Dunk from the Bleav podcast network. Justin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
What's up, fellas? Thanks for having me on.
So, Justin, you want to just plug what you're doing over at Bleav and any other projects you're doing right now?
For sure, man. I'll do it real quick. So you can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days at JDunk12. And we've got the Bleav in Jaguars show, which is running at the Bleav Network. As you mentioned there, brings on various guests, kind of like you guys are doing with me this week. We have people from opposing markets and then also people from in the market in Jacksonville to give you the best insight we can about the Jaguars. And also I cover a lot of Canadian football, CFL, Canadian university football, and guys that are going from Canada to the pros, just like Tavius Robinson has done from my hometown, Guelph, Ontario. It's just outside of Toronto for the uninitiated. He actually went to the rival high school. I played for John F. Ross in Guelph. He played for GCVI. He was a little bit younger than me, so we didn't go against each other. But I realized this kid was going to have a shot to go to the NFL very young because he was so tall, rangy, a lengthy dude. And he's gone along here and put on this weight on his frame. So I'll give you one kind of unique story about Tavius before we get going here. The interesting part about him is he never really thought that he was this high-level football player, a very under the radar kind of a guy. He is not cocky. He's far from it. He can be confident, though. So he goes to University of Guelph, which is, I said, is where I played my university football. Was a quarterback there, started for 5 years. Tavius was a defensive lineman. He earns conference all-star. COVID happens. The season gets canceled. And then he's thinking, well, I got to continue to play somehow. So Lane Kiffin down at Ole Miss offers him a scholarship to go down there and play for the Rebels. And all of a sudden he gets drafted, in the mid rounds by the Ravens, and he's starting ball games and he has already a sack with Baltimore, man. So it's so great to see a kid kind of coming out of nowhere, Guelph, Ontario, first kid ever to come from Guelph and play in the NFL.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Tavius. Yeah. We love him. I mean, I think we were just talking before the show about him, and it's just one of those guys we really liked coming out of college. One of those guys, like, you could really tell would be kind of in the history of Ravens drafting these mid-round defensive guys who, maybe not be starting right away, but take a couple of years for to develop. But you could tell there's just like some intangibles about him. Obviously you like the size combinations you have. He's got tremendous length. You love his effort as well. Is definitely a high motor guy who, you could see it in the games. Plays the run very well and a lot of that stuff. So, yeah, I think I think I can speak for Peter and I here, where this year, where I think we're seeing more from him than maybe either of us have expected. But definitely liking what we're seeing so far, and I mean that's just an awesome story to have these personal connections. Well, we love hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tavius Robinson. Man, it looks like another late round find for the Ravens. We love seeing that. And, maybe we wouldn't have led this episode with Tavius Robinson had there not been a personal connection with you. But, I think that it actually is a good way to open this episode. And the reason I say that is because, Tavius Robinson, a guy who's stepped up and had an impact more than expected due to injuries. And, while I wouldn't say that either the Ravens or the Jaguars have suffered a ton of injuries, certainly this late in the year, that is something that is playing a huge role in these games is, teams are banged up. They've got starters going down, and who's going to step up and keep the flag, chugging along when those guys do. Tavius Robinson is a guy who's done it for the Ravens. There's been some other guys. I'm sure there's been guys on the Jaguars as well that you could point to who, maybe not guys that listeners of this podcast are familiar with because they don't follow the Jaguars like they follow the Ravens. But at this point in the season, teams are all, suffering injuries to key guys, and guys have to step up.
You're right, man. And that's the case with the Jaguars, as you mentioned there, especially you go back to week 13, the Monday Night Football game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Everybody across the states and Canada and probably maybe even the globe was picking the Jags to win that game, right? You had Jake Browning making just his second career NFL start, Joe Burrow out for the season. So the Jags go in there as heavy favorites in that game. I think the line was around 10 points in favor of the Jaguars at home. Jacksonville ends up losing the game. Trevor Lawrence suffers a right high ankle sprain, though he did play and looked pretty much just fine against Cleveland in week 14. We'll get to that in a second. But then they have their left tackle at the time, Walker Little, goes down with a hamstring injury. Cam Robinson, the guy that should be starting at left tackle for them, is on IR. Christian Kirk, the first play of that game against Cincinnati, catches a deep ball, but then suffers a core muscle injury. He's probably going to go on IR. There's maybe a chance he can get back, depending how deep the Jaguars go in the playoffs, but he's arguably their most reliable receiver, and at the time, he was their most productive receiver. Then they go up to Cleveland. Andre Sisco, a rising safety for Jacksonville, gets hurt there. He's out of the game. The guy that had to start for Walker Little, who I mentioned earlier, that got hurt against Cincinnati, Ezra Cleveland, making his first career start at left tackle in the NFL. He had been a guard with Minnesota, and then Jacksonville brought him over at the trade deadline. He kicks out to left tackle. He gets hurt. So they got to reshuffle the offensive line again with Tyler Shatley and Blake Hance on that left side. So the Jags have been dealing with their own injuries, just like everybody else. And I really think it's just par for the course now, especially with this expanded season.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of want to go right into it as well. You mentioned Trevor Lawrence kind of on that list. Obviously, he did end up playing in that game against Cleveland. I just wanted to get your, take, Justin, of like, how do you think he performed that game? And maybe you can talk about the other offense as a whole, of the guys kind of stepping up. Like, how did you think they played against Cleveland?
I think, especially for the offense, they could have played much better. It seemed like they were asleep for a bunch of the start of that game, especially. Now, granted, they were going in there against the NFL's top-rated defense in a lot of categories, and the dog pound can be really loud. But the Jags have been really good on the road and away from Jacksonville this season. Up until that game, they were 6-0 in games outside of Jacksonville. That's including one of the London games where they were, quote, like a road team. But, in reality, even the other game that they played over there, they were a home team, but it's still a road game. I don't care what people say. So it just looked like a totally different team, even though the locker room really felt this push from Lawrence to play through that high ankle sprain. And he looked great. He clearly did everything he could behind the scenes, had a walking boot on for a little bit, then a compression sock on Wednesday when he had immediate availability that day, walked without a limp, and really never looked like he was not going to start that game. But he didn't seem like he was playing to his usual level, especially at the start of the game. There were some interceptions in that game that were not favorable to Lawrence, that did not look good on him. There was another one where Calvin Ridley and him in the red zone just weren't on the same page. But I think he has been on the wrong end of a lot of drops. The Jaguars have dropped a lot of passes. Ridley has been one of those guys who has been very inconsistent for this team in dropping balls at key times or having mental errors at key times as well. It's really costing this offense, but they have a major issue, and I think this is going to be difficult against the Ravens to get it going, of running the ball, especially inside the tackles. You look at Travis Etienne Jr.'s yards per carry average, and it's low. It's under 4. And against the Browns, it was under 3. So they have at times tried to commit to the run, hoping to get one big rip from Etienne Jr., but that hasn't happened of late. And then on defense, they had a number of errors that led to Joe Flacco throwing for over 300 yards in that game. David Njoku was running completely free for 2 touchdowns. And then on a 4th down situation, Darius Williams slips. Granted, he slips on the turf, and David Bell takes it to the house for a 41-yard touchdown that kind of broke the back of the Jags in that game. So they're not playing as consistent complementary football as Jacksonville did early in the season, and they better bring it because you guys and I well know how physical the Ravens are going to be on Sunday night.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, I'm sure you remember that game clearly, what that was last year. We remember it, both sides of that game, where it was a physical game. And I think that's something that was really interesting about that game. Gosh, there's so much you said that I want to unpack, but I think we want to delve a little more into Trevor Lawrence, because you're talking about, defensively, there's some cracks have been shown over the past couple weeks. Just like we were talking about in our previous episode, the Ravens defense, which has been so good this year, struggled a little bit against the Rams. So Lamar Jackson had to step up and do a little more than he's usually had to do this year. You look at his statistics, his touchdowns aren't, quite as high as some of the other guys in the league. Trevor Lawrence, to me, I think is such an interesting guy. Comes in as this huge prospect, and he's had a pretty good start to his career, in my opinion, but it feels like the general NFL world is still waiting for him to take that next step, right? He's not quite on the level, right, of a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen right now, from my perspective. But as someone who follows the Jaguars, what do you see from Trevor Lawrence, what he's shown so far in his career versus, what the expectation of him coming out of college has been? Is he living up to your expectations? Or are you waiting for him to just take that last step to be that superstar that he's projected to be?
There's definitely a step or two there to be taken from Lawrence at this point, but I still think he's on a pretty nice upward trajectory, right? The stock market, you always want to see up and to the right. And I think that is really the case with Lawrence. That said, sometimes trajectories aren't always a straight line, right? You can have a couple steps backwards and take a big leap forwards. And I think overall, Lawrence is at a pretty good spot. But when you're the number one pick and you're the face of the franchise for so long, and especially in Jacksonville, getting it turned around there, everybody's looking at him all the time to make a number of big plays. And I don't think he's at that level yet with a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen, because I kind of think those two guys are at a level all on their own in terms of being able to put their team on their shoulders. I think Lamar Jackson is really close to that. A lot of people are talking about Brock Purdy and is he a system QB or not a system QB? But in terms of Lawrence, I still think there is a step to go there. And he's really going to be tested here without Kirk for probably the rest of the regular season because he was so reliable. Now he's going to have to deal with Ridley, who has been inconsistent. At times, it seems like they've been on the same page, but then there's spurts where it doesn't seem like they're seeing it the same way. And sometimes it becomes very clear, like that interception that happened in Cleveland in the red zone that I mentioned. And Zay Jones, I think, is a real key to this offense. But ever since he's been dealing with this nagging knee injury that he suffered rather early in the season, I don't think this offense has been quite as dangerous. He doesn't have that same top-end speed, and we saw that against the Browns. There were a couple plays there to be made, one right in his hands that could have changed the momentum of that game and gave Jacksonville a real boost, but he wasn't able to make it. And I think a large part of that is due to this knee issue that he's been dealing with. Evan Ingram is an outstanding tight end. I really think he's underrated. He got in the end zone twice against Cleveland, but there are still times where I'm expecting Lawrence to be able to make a throw into a tight window, down the field, or convert a third down that you need if you're going to talk about this guy being in the upper echelon of quarterbacks in the NFL. And I'm kind of waiting for him to do that more consistently this season. He's right up there. If you look at Pro Football Focus and their grading system, he's among the best in the league. But I still think at those critical times, he needs to come through, especially third downs, guys. Third down has been a very sore spot for this Jacksonville offense. They're in the bottom third of the league when you talk about third down conversion percentage this season. So I think Lawrence needs to be better and step up on those critical money down situations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you kind of mentioned it too. One of the things that really helps, in this third and medium, third and short situations, is having a run game that you can rely on to be able to pick up those first downs. And yeah, I kind of wanted to pivot over to ETN a little bit to kind of get your take for kind of how he's been this season. But he's one of those players to me. I feel like he can be extremely dynamic. He's obviously used in both the run and the passing game. He brings a really unique skill set to this offense. Um, but he's not necessarily one of those guys who I feel like is can reliably always be able to convert those. He's definitely a little bit more of a smaller back, I think. Not built like the Derrick Henry or some of the bigger running backs in that aspect. So, what have you seen from him, and how do you think ETN could play in this game and try to take some of that pressure off of Lawrence?
What we've seen from Etienne Jr. in 2023 is the fact that he can handle a heavy workload, right? You guys remember there were questions when he was coming out of Clemson University there with his good buddy T-Law, Trevor Lawrence, as to whether or not he would be more of a scat back, a guy that's kind of maybe used in those various roles, but maybe you can't give it to him 20 times in a game, whether that's running or receiving. But he's shown this year that he can do that. And I think the main reason for his yards per carry this season being so low is the interior of that Jacksonville offensive line has lacked consistency, and they have not been able to create a push on a consistent basis. Yes, there have been different guys in there, and they only really had Cam Robinson for like a handful of games there, and the offensive line seems like it's changed a lot. But the three guys in the middle, you go from center, right guard, and right tackle have all been the same. Luke Fortner, Brandon Sheriff, and Anton Harrison. Harrison, yes, he's a rookie. Those three guys have largely been the same this season. So I think there needs to be more push from the Jaguars interior to help ETN Jr. out. But the other thing that's happened, fellas, is Tank Bigsby, a guy that they drafted fairly high in the NFL draft, hasn't panned out early on the way that he might have seemed like he would when they picked him. He got some touches early in the season, had some ball security issues, had a play where he thought the whistle was blown, it was knocked away, ball was taken the other way back for a touchdown in Indy in week 1, and that didn't help him gain the trust of the coaching staff. So we haven't really seen much of Bigsby. We saw him sprinkled in a little bit in the Wildcat there with ETN Jr. in Cleveland, but again, it was ETN Jr. on those carries. We've seen more of Dearness Johnson being used because he has earned more of the trust from Doug Peterson and Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator. So I think that's been part of the issue why ETN Jr. maybe is not at his most productive, because he's had to shoulder literally the entire load in the running game. I think Jacksonville's offense could potentially be at its best when Johnson or Bigsby, who they were really high on when they took him in the draft, step up and have some runs that are consistent where he can take away some of those touches on ETN Jr.'s plate.
Yeah, Tank Bigsby's early season has been definitely very interesting. A bit disappointing for him. I mean, you've had this running back class, I feel, has been huge this year. So many guys hitting their stride, but like you said, still early in his career. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I think that's an interesting matchup to watch in this game. So you're saying it was actually the question that I was going to lead with you next on discussing the interior of the Jaguars offensive line. That's been an interesting one as a matchup perspective for the Ravens this year. We've seen games where the Ravens have really dominated that, like against Seattle and against Detroit. But then you have other games, weirdly, against Arizona, this past game against the Rams, where the teams have been able to have some success rushing in there. But, there's a lot of big bodies up there with the Ravens. Michael Pierce, he's been better as a pass rusher this year than as a run stuffer, but he's been in there on the run. Justin Matabike, Travis Jones, there's big guys there who I think will match up really well and cause some problems for the interior of the Jaguars line. But yeah, I think that's going to be one of the keys you look at of this game. Who wins that matchup? If the Jaguars are able to get ETN running, that's going to, I think, lead to a closer game. But if the Ravens can stop them, you're talking about the Jaguars without Christian Kirk, you have to rely more on Ridley and Evan Ingram. Uh, that's probably not what the Jaguars want to be right now. Be kind of one-dimensional in the passing attack based on how you're framing it right now.
Exactly, not at all. And I think they would like to establish the run more, but that push just hasn't been there. Etienne Jr. has created a lot of yards after contact. He's been right up there among the NFL leaders in that stat category all season long, kind of going back and forth with CMC, Christian McCaffrey. In terms of that, yards after contact, he's created a lot of yards on his own with not much blocking. Some of that is due to the injury issues and the inconsistency in terms of who's starting up front on the offensive line, but they just have to be better because you alluded to it, and we saw this happen in Cleveland, that they just could not run the ball consistently. They went to the Wildcat a little bit, but even out of that, the defense knows they're going to run. They haven't shown any plays off of that, and especially against the Browns, and I would think against the Ravens too. You're not going to want to have a trick play and put the ball in Lawrence's hands when he's dealing with this high ankle sprain. So I don't really understand using the Wildcat as much as they have. Yeah, he did score the touchdown on it, which was a really nice run, and the body control was crazy for Etienne Jr. to keep his legs off the ground and actually get into the end zone. They initially ruled it not a touchdown, but the fact that he has that kind of athleticism shows you how good this guy can be. And perhaps it only takes one crease, one run to get a chunk gain and really bring some of that confidence back. But right now, I think it's advantage Ravens when you're talking about stuffing the run up front on that defense, because Jacksonville has not been good enough at it. And you mentioned, the injury issue with Kirk there. Parker Washington is going to be a guy that they're going to look to. He's a rookie. He had a pretty good game on Monday Night Football when he made his first catches in the NFL, 6 for 61 and touchdown, but he had a fumble early on against the Browns, came back with a touchdown in that game. So he's flashed a little bit, but really the guy that's got to step up here and I think would help the run game is Ridley. He's been so quiet, especially of late. Him and Zay Jones have to get going. One of the major numbers that stuck out to a lot of people around Jacksonville in that loss to Cleveland was 9 of 27. Trevor Lawrence targeted either Calvin Ridley or Zay Jones 27 times in that game. There were only 9 completions. That cannot happen if you're expecting to beat anybody in the NFL, let alone this feisty Ravens defense.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of incompletions. Yeah, and it's funny too. I mean, looking back to that game last year against the Jags, where you guys end up winning that one, Zay Jones was a huge difference in that game. He just feasted on the matchups that he had against our cornerbacks. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly, I think there's an opportunity. I think, like we were talking about with the Rams recap, the secondary is a little shaky. It has been a I won't say a strength of the team, but it's been a better position group than we originally anticipated going into the season. Really, we had Marlon Humphrey and we had our safeties that we're generally high on as a group. But behind Marlon Humphrey, we were very concerned. Brandon Stevens was a player who, in the beginning of the season, played a little bit of cornerback, played a little bit of safety. But honestly, I think people had a lot of concerns about him being your second cornerback. Well, Marlon ends up getting hurt. And so Brandon Stevens is now thrust to the cornerback 1 role. And we have a bunch of guys that we end up signing, Rock Ya-Sin and Ronald Darby, who ended up kind of having to fill out that corner room. And to be honest, for most of the season, I think it's been a pleasant surprise. I think a lot of those players, I think Stevens has been way better than advertised. I think Darby has been a really solid player. Rock Ya-Sin, maybe not there yet, but has played a little bit. But this game against the Rams, definitely a little shaky. Stevens, I think, played okay. Marlon came back from his injury. He looked a little shaky. And, and I think the other guy who I kind of have to talk about as well, who I think is going to be a key matchup between the Ravens and the Jags here, is if Kyle Hamilton is going to play. He ended up playing about half the game against the Rams. They ended up pulling him out and then putting him back in and then pulling him out again. It seems like he has a grade 1 MCL. So they're not guaranteed to miss any time. Might make it back for the Jags game, might not. Depends on what the Ravens want to do. But honestly, I mean, he is going to be the key. If he's in, he's going to be matching up against, whoever's going to be in that slot, whether it's Ingram, whether it's, Ridley. He's going to be assigned to cover those guys. And I mean, he's got tremendous size and length to be able to cover those guys. So if not, it's Arthur Millette. Arthur Millette is very undersized. So I wouldn't want to match him up against Ridley, to be honest. Whether Ridley's playing well or not, I just think there's a physical mismatch there. But yeah, I think that'll be definitely one of the key matchups we're looking for the Jags to get back on track, or whether the Ravens are going to continue to dominate.
Yeah, if you're Jacksonville, I think you have to look at some of those matchups that you talked about with the cornerbacks and say, okay, Ridley's got to have a game here. And I think Jags fans and people who cover the team and even probably internally felt like Ridley should have been able to take advantage of some of the matchups he had against Cleveland, considering Denzel Ward, their best cover corner by like a mile, was out. They had other guys step up, and Ridley just seems a little bit lifeless out there. So I think this is a very critical game for Ridley. Also consider the fact that the Jaguars are going to have to make some offseason decisions on him. So I think he needs to be able to step up in a primetime game here. That's going to be key for the playoffs and just for the confidence of the Jags on this 2-game losing streak.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a huge game, like you're saying, for Ridley. Also for this defense, let's shift sides to that side of the ball. Like you said, past 2 games, they've offered up a lot more air yards than you'd like to see. And really, in those 2 games, you're going against 2 very much so pocket passers, right? Browning, 38-year-old Flacco, certainly. I mean, gosh, we all love Joe, obviously, as Ravens fans here. But, there's a reason that Flacco was available, right? 38 years old and all those injuries. Props to him for what he's doing. And, we're rooting for his stats. We're certainly not rooting for him to win, because then that would mean, bumping us out.
Yeah, there was one play I remember. There was one play against the Jags that I remember seeing, speaking of like pocket passers, where I think it was like a fake bootleg. Joe pulls out the other way, and I think it was number 90 on the Jags, should have had Flacco dead to right. You just literally just go up and try to tackle that, because he's not going to be able to escape a sack in the open field like that. He ends up going back into coverage, and I was just like, why? What a strange way to play that, where it gets a 38-year-old Flacco. Like, to me, as a guy who's watched Flacco for his whole career, like, that's a play you just go after him, and he's no way you're going to be able to escape that play. It was just very odd.
Definitely, man. Come downhill and make the tackle on the old guy.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, but very different matchup this week. So I think we got a lead when we're looking at defense with that. Lamar Jackson, last year against you guys, in the past game, it was a lot of mediocrity. He did finish with 254 yards, but a good chunk of that was a deep bomb pass to Deshaun Jackson, who was actually on the Ravens for a couple games last year. On the ground, he had a lot of success. 14 carries, 89 yards, which was good for 6.4 per carry. So when you look at the Jaguars defense this year compared to last year, do you feel like they're better or worse equipped to take on a dual threat quarterback like Lamar? And what do you think is going to be their approach to trying to contain what he can do?
They're probably better this year, just for the simple fact that Josh Allen is playing at a Pro Bowl and potential All-Pro kind of level. He did not have a sack against Cleveland, but Jags fans were all over social media saying they thought he was getting held on every play. I think Myles Garrett kind of felt the same way in that game, and actually liked the way the officials called that game. They kind of let guys play. There were a couple of what people might describe of questionable pass interference flags that were not thrown in that game, but I felt like overall the officials kind of let them play football, which is ultimately what we're here to line up and do. So I think the fact that Allen has been so consistent getting after the passer should make them better theoretically to defend Lamar Jackson. That said, that guy's so dynamic in the open field that you're going to look like an idiot real quick saying that and even trying to get him on the turf, as you guys well know. Yeah. And on the other side, Trayvon Walker, even though he doesn't have a double-digit sack total this season yet, he's got a whole bunch of pressures. Like Allen and Walker have over 30 QB pressures on the season. I Bleav they're the only duo in the NFL to have that amount of pressures. Now, that's one thing to pressure Jackson. It's a complete other thing to get him on the ground. So I do think that they're going to have to be weary of that. But you look at this linebacking core that has stayed relatively healthy. You have Devin Lloyd in the middle, who I think is very athletic, and Foye Oluokun, I think, is one of the underrated linebackers in the league. He's trying to lead the NFL for 3 straight seasons in tackles. And I think this guy kind of is the vocal leader of this defense and also the leader by example, because he's a little bit undersized, but he just makes play after play after play. So I think kind of between those 4 guys, they should have enough to be able to somewhat contain Jackson. But as you guys well know, it just takes one play with that dynamic athleticism and that high-end kind of Lamborghini speed to get loose real quick on you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that can kind of go off of there. I mean, Oluokun, I think, that matchup again, going back last year, I mean, that was an incredible game from him. He ended up having 18 total tackles, 13 solo, 3 tackles for loss. I mean, he was all over the place. I think definitely having a strong linebacking core, I think it does a lot, I think, for the Ravens, negatively, I think. Obviously pass rush, that's, one area that I think, honestly, I'd have to give the edge to the Jags, because the Ravens tackle situations has been not ideal this year. Ronnie Stanley is a guy who, I think his best games are likely behind him at this point because of all of his injuries that he's had. He struggled a little bit. I think the Ravens even decided to kind of have a rotation with the last game with Patrick McCary. So Stanley didn't even play the whole game. I think he ended up probably around 70% of the snaps or something like that. But and even Morgan Moses, I think he's had some struggle with injuries as well. So yeah, if I'm looking at this game against those guys, against Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, I'm trying to dial up maybe some inside runs or some quick plays, I think, to try not to have Lamar stand back in the pocket for too long, because as much as he's able to escape, I think this year in particular he hasn't pulled that card as much as maybe it had in the past. I think we've kind of talked about it on this show in terms of like pulling out his Superman cape. In the past, I think he'd be more than willing to just kind of, pocket breaks down. He's going to run for it and then pick up a lot of yards. This time he's going to break the pocket, but he's going to try and find somebody downfield. And, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't, and then ends up taking that sack, or, maybe you might escape for a couple yards, but you're not going to see those, big, 30, 40, 50 yard plays when Lamar just kind of escapes and run through a defense.
That's probably good for Jacksonville to hear, but man, that guy is so electric in the open field.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, watching him live last Sunday, was reminded again, as I am reminded every time I see it. It's just how lucky we are as a fan base to have that guy. It's still so crazy how many teams passed on him in 2018, including the Ravens, because that was our second first-round pick that year. We had to trade back into the first round to get him. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just been incredible for the Ravens, obviously. Yeah, so I guess you're talking about the front seven of this defense. Yeah, the linebackers definitely did catch my eye. Like, you guys have a ton of talent there. Certainly a lot of guys there who are having great seasons, have had great careers. But yeah, I guess to move next would be to the secondary, which is a group I will admit I'm not as familiar with as the rest of that defense. I was looking at a lot of guys and not names that I feel like the average NFL fan is terribly familiar with. I Bleav Andre Cisco, I remember from last year. I know he's made some splash plays this year as well as last year. But yeah, I mean, we discussed some of the holes that we've seen in the pass defense over the past couple of weeks. Is that due to injury, scheme, or what's really going on with the Jaguars secondary right now?
A bit of it's been injury, but honestly, some of it's just been mental errors, missed assignments, and guys slipping. Like I mentioned, Darius Williams on 4th down against Cleveland to give up a big touchdown to Bell. Darius Williams has been the Jags' best cornerback this season. He's a guy that's really risen to the occasion a number of times, has a bunch of PBUs, has some interceptions, knows how to get his hands on the football. And a large reason for that is because Tyson Campbell has kind of been in and out of the lineup. He didn't play last week against Cleveland. There was some thought that he could go, but he's kind of battling this nagging hamstring injury. And there were people at the start of the year, including my sometimes co-host on the Bleav in Jaguars show, Clay Harbor, former NFL tight end, played for the Jags. It felt like this guy has a chance to be a top 5 cornerback in the NFL, but when you're not on the field, you can't even be in that conversation. So we'll have to monitor Campbell's situation because he's a guy that has that elite talent, but he's got to stay on the field. You mentioned Cisco there. He flashed early in the season. I feel like he's been a little bit more inconsistent lately. Rayshon Jenkins had a pretty solid effort against the Browns, but a couple of those touchdowns were scheme as well. Doug Peterson admitted, especially the first one to Njoku off play action. The Jags dialed up a blitz. It was just perfect play call against what Jacksonville was doing on defense. The other one, they just got against Njoku, was streaking on the field wide open, busted the coverage. So they need to be much more consistent and just do the simple things right. Mike Caldwell's defense was talking about the Monday Night Football game where the crowd actually was too loud that they couldn't get their signals around the defense properly against Jake Browning, which, you know, at first blush, I'm kind of like, man, just deal with it. You're playing defense, like get it in, signal it, whatever you got to do. But it's kind of a positive for the Jags because they're not used to having that many fans in the building making that much noise. So it's something that they're just going to have to get used to and deal with. I've never really heard that as a pseudo excuse from a defensive coordinator, but something they got to play with. And Caldwell's unit looked like the backbone of this team, especially early on in the season when the offense was kind of going through it a little bit, and there were a bunch of drops there, you know, especially after they went into Indy in week 1 and put up 31 points to win the game. There's a bit of a lull from the offense there. So the defense needs to get back to playing consistent football, and I think it would be very beneficial for this defense overall if the secondary started to step up a little bit here. I think that front 7 can be pretty good, especially the linebacking core, right? When you talk about Allen and Walker being a part of that with Lloyd and Aluka, and that's a very good linebacking core. I think it might even be in the discussion as one of the best in the NFL. Obviously, they run the 3-4, but still, it's a really good position group there for Jacksonville. So I think this secondary needs to step up and play more complementary football like they've been playing together for a while, and they have. Monteric Buster Brown, I should mention him real quick. He's been the guy that's filling in for Tyson Campbell at cornerback. He's played probably above and beyond anybody's expectations at cornerback. So he's a guy that can play really well, but he's had his moments at times too where he's broken down and had some of these mental errors that has gotten this Jacksonville defense the last couple of games.
Yeah, I certainly think you know, it's an area that to me I think is the biggest question mark going into it from like a matchup against the Ravens. I think, you know, I think for the Ravens offense, we've, you know, historically relied much more on the run game. I think this year we've been trying to make the pass game more of an emphasis. One thing that really kind of has eluded us, though, for most of the season has been the deep passing game up until the Rams game, where it kind of felt like that was a point of emphasis over the bye. And we really started to see Lamar air it out much more than he has. I mean, he ended up having over 300 yards passing. That's pretty rare for Lamar, actually. I think, you know, he's much more in the kind of the 200, 250 range with, you know, maybe about 50 to 70 yards rushing is probably about an average Lamar game. So I think if, you know, if the Ravens want to try and do that again this week, I guess I could see it. But it's certainly something that, you know, as a Ravens fan, I'm not sure I feel totally good about just because we haven't seen consistent success there. But certainly I think you need to be able to kind of test the linebacking core, test the secondary of the Jags a little bit because, you know, as we've seen, like you guys play as hard. I think not just in the game last year, but just like historically, I think the Jags play the Ravens pretty hard. I think they match up pretty well. There's just something about these games. They always seem to be really close. So, you know, I don't think it's going to be easy. And I think, you know, I think it'll be too easy for us to kind of be one dimensional in this offense. And so we got to find a good mix of power on offense just to be able to keep up with you guys, I think, even with all the injuries on the offense.
The one thing that the Jags need to do better overall is be used to playing in prime time, right? Like this is the first time that Jaguars are going to play on Sunday Night Football, I think, going back way back. Like Trevor Lawrence was 9 years old the last time they played on Sunday Night Football. The last time they played on Monday Night Football was going all the way back to 2011. So this group in particular is not necessarily used to the primetime games. Doug Peterson is, though. His record in primetime is really good. It's among the best, if not the best, among his NFL head coaching counterparts in the league. But I think that's a major difference going into this game, is that the Ravens are used to this, right? Lamar Jackson and the group, John Harbaugh, everybody else, they're used to playing in the national spotlight. Jacksonville needs to step up and be ready for that. I saw a little bit of frustration from Lawrence on Monday Night Football. I think part of that was just due to the expectation and playing at home and the fact that everybody felt like they were going to just waltz all over Cincinnati, and that didn't happen. So I think we need to see Jacksonville prove if they're actually ready for primetime lights.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, it looks like it's going to be an exciting game. Can't wait to watch that. Coming up right now, what we do, Justin, we will give a score prediction for the game and then a bold prediction with that. So bold prediction can be, whatever we want. You can make it reasonable. Say, like Trevor Lawrence is going to throw for 3 touchdowns. You can make it crazy. Say like Travis Etienne is going to get 700 yards rushing. Whatever. There's no rules. Whatever you want to say. You are the guest, so you get the opportunity to go first if you want, or defer. So
I'll give it a go, man. I think I know where you guys are going with this one. I'll say that Calvin Ridley needs to have a game, and if it's gonna be under the primetime lights, there's no better time to do it when everybody's been kind of all over you consistently. So I'll say Ridley goes for over 150 yards in this game to kind of shut up some of his naysayers. But, as for a prediction this game, I think it's a tough one to put a handicap on overall, right? You got the Ravens coming off a highly emotional, wild overtime win against the Rams. The Jags are coming off their first road loss of the season in a game where they kind of got beat up a little bit more. I don't love the spot for Jacksonville being at home because they haven't really played there. But I think the Jags feel like their backs are against the wall and they come out fighting here and they win a very scrappy, tight, physical game. Something like 23-20, 24-21, 20-17. In that range. I definitely think that the Ravens can win it. That obviously wouldn't surprise me, but I just feel like that emotional letdown after that victory last week that Baltimore had can really favor the Jags, and the Jags need to be focused here. They need to win this game. They're only 1 game up in the division. Yes, they have some tiebreakers, but those other teams, Indy and Houston, are right on their heels. And there was a time not too long ago, just 2 games ago, fellas, that everybody in Duval County was talking about Jacksonville competing for the number 1 seed in the AFC. So it is put up or shut up time, I think, for this version of the Jaguars.
I like it. Always love when we have a guest come in here and defend their team, man. It's great. All right. So before Chris or I give our predictions, Alec, our third host, was unable to make it tonight, but he did record his bold prediction and stats, or score prediction, I should say. And we're going to hear about that right now.
With the Ravens favored by 3.5 points on a Sunday night game where the over-under is 43.5, I think it's going to be a really tough game with the Jaguars. I think they're a good team. I think we underestimated me last time. Even though we said they were on the ascendancy, they definitely showed that they're here and they're real. The defense is pretty solid. And I think Lawrence is still a good quarterback despite his injury. So I think the Ravens do win this game. I think they win 31-24. And I think it's on the defense side of the ball where the big plays will come. I'm thinking that the secondary does get a pick and that we also register 3 sacks. And I think this is significant because against the Rams, what was effective was these high-low concepts and, just quick decisions. The ball was coming out kind of quick. And the pass rush was kind of non-existent, and they didn't get any interceptions. So I'm hoping to see a little bit of a turnaround, and for the defense, while giving up points, being a key part of turning the game around.
All right. Alec picks the Ravens to win, which shocked absolutely no one. I think he has a 100% take there of always taking the Ravens. Man, yeah, this is an interesting game, and I I think, Justin, you put out a really interesting aspect to this game, that the Jaguars, they don't want to lose 3 straight. Like you said, they've had all this momentum going. They're going to be desperate. They will be at home, which interestingly is a place that ever since the disbandment of the AFC Central, the Ravens have only have 1 win on the road against Jacksonville. That was in 2016 on a Justin Tucker field goal, and 4 other games in Jacksonville or London, which have been losses for them. So tough spot for the Ravens here historically on the road. Obviously, teams are different. And one thing that concerns me about this game for the Ravens, and we talked about it while we were watching the game, is they won, yes, but there were a lot of mistakes. There were a lot of ways that game could have gone south. So, this game could be a wake-up call for them that you have to, shore those things up. I think that the desperation factor is going to give the Jaguars the slight edge here, 30-27. My bold prediction here is that we're going to get 400 yards of total offense from Lamar Jackson. But, that might be enough. We'll see. Honestly, I'm going to give you guys the edge just because it's at home. And like I said, you guys have to win this game. But honestly, this game really feels like a toss-up. Either team could win this one. It's going to be a tight.
Yeah. It's really tricky because I think the last 4 games for the Ravens, you got at Jags, at 49ers, and then home games against the Dolphins and Steelers. Steelers right now, I think, are looking on the downturn just after injuries and just bad play from them. But those 3 games, certainly a gauntlet. And as much as I really, the Jags are going to have to win this game. But honestly, I don't know if the Ravens can afford to lose this one either. I think of the 3, the Niners game, just from a seeding perspective, I think that's the game to lose. I think you've got to win these games against the Jags and the Dolphins to compete in the AFC to try to get that 1 seed, or whatever seed they want to try and get. I do think it's going to be close, though. Yeah, these games against Jacksonville, man, they're always weird. They're always close when you don't think they're going to be close. Even when the Jags were terrible, these games were close, or they ended up winning these games. It's just crazy how that works. So I can see it going either way. I'm going to pick the Ravens, though. I can't have 3 of us picking the Jags on this pod. 3 out of 4. I can't do that. So I'm going to say they win. Yeah, I'm going to keep it even. I'm going to say they win. I'll say 27-24. Like I said, I think it's going to be close. As far as bold predictions, Marcus Williams, I think he's going to have an interception in this game. I think he's earned it. It's been a while with him coming back from his injuries. I think he's been getting better every week. I think he's been making plays. Tackling hasn't been as best. I think it's been up and down, but I think from a ball hawking perspective, he's gotten his hands on a couple of footballs. There was one, he ended up making a play out of bounds on a 2-2 Outwell. Could have came down with that pick if that ball was a little bit more inside the field of play. So I think he's going to make a big play that's going to make a difference in this game.
All on the record, boys. I like it.
All right. There you have it. Well, Justin, once again, thanks so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking this game with you. And let's hoping that we all have a great game to watch this Sunday night. It's going to be a real letdown if this is a blowout one way or the other. I want to see a nice competitive game against these 2 teams. And we'll see. We'll see where both these teams end up when it's all said and done. But thank you also to all you listening. As always, you can catch us on YouTube. We're on Twitter, wherever you download podcasts. And look, it's getting late in the season. We're getting close to the playoffs. It's picture's starting to get clear. It's been a great season. Let's see how this ends up.
Go Ravens.